You're listening to Content Logistics, a podcast for B2B marketers looking to build a content engine that drives revenue. In each episode, Camille Trent interviews the marketers behind the best content marketing flywheels and uncovers the tactical aspects of content production, from first draft to first customer.
Welcome to another episode of Content Logistics. I'm your host, Camille Trent, and this episode is brought to you by my good friends, Tristan and Justin over at Motion. They are a full stack podcasting agency for busy B2B tech marketers like myself, probably like you, looking to launch a podcast, kind of like this one. So if you have a podcast idea, I know you do, in the back of your head that you just haven't been able to realize, they can help be that forcing function for you, get it out the door, get it repurposed, get it on repeat. So highly recommend them. Production quality is top notch. They're also just good folk. Today, our guest is Amanda Natividad. She is the VP of Marketing over at SparkToro. I wanted to bring her on to talk through the logistics of audience research for community-led content. Here's our interview.
Amanda, thanks for having me, Camille. Yeah, so the other day, John Bonini, who, for those who don't know, was at Databox. He talked about this idea of content brands, right? And so it's going to show like how small my world is, but it seems like every content marketer now is content brands. Like content brands is a thing. How do I create a content brand? Next day, I saw a post about like all in on content brands, and SparkToro came up as an example in that post of, you know, what's a good example of a content brand? And to define it for folks who haven't read the newsletter, it's brands that you love and recommend, like almost solely because of the content. So you might not even know exactly what their product does. You're not a user of their product, but for some reason you find yourself like recommending it because their content is good. And so you kind of equate that with the quality of the product. So I wanted to start there with you and Rand have kind of figured something out with your audience, right? Of just creating content that resonates better than the average, content marketing. So I want to start out with, where do people go wrong with audience research, and why does most content fall flat?
Oh my gosh. Thank you for this. Thank you for the setup too. That was beautiful. Where do most people go wrong with audience research? I feel like the one mistake, and I still make, we all make this sometimes, is we think we already know the answers, right? We're like, I already know my audience. I know they like this. I know they like that. I know they're on Twitter. I know they're on LinkedIn. I know they're talking about content or whatever, which I think is, I think sometimes, or maybe most of the time, we're mostly right, right? But we in taking that sort of mindset towards it, we end up diminishing or dismissing all the other things that add nuance, that paints the overall picture of your audience, that makes you produce better content. So I think the mistake people make is that we, assume that we know what we don't actually know. And we assume that once we know, or like once we do the research, that it doesn't change. That we're like, got it, I'm all set, we're good for the next 5 years. But no, you're not.
Oh man, yeah, we could riff on that specific thing for a while here. I will try not to. But what it reminds me of, I've like harped on this a few times, of like the number one thing like killing your marketing is assumptions, right? Like you're assuming that you know your audience, that you know what they want, that you know how to do marketing well, that what worked 5 years ago is going to work today. Like all of those assumptions sort of like killing your market. And part of this for me was like, it's especially hard when your audience is you, right? Like when your audience is content marketers or is marketers, to the extent where at one point in my career, I was like, I need to do something else to make sure that I'm actually a marketer and not a subject matter expert at this point too, like to make sure that I'm doing the research. So kind of follow-up question, like if you're in that situation, right? And maybe you're a good example of marketers are your audience. How do you make sure that you don't just play into your own like perceptions and assumptions about your audience?
Gosh, yeah. I think a lot of it is really just well, I think one, it's making sure my information intake, like the feed, so to speak, is full of diverse people and voices. Like, and I don't even just mean, demographically or in an, ethnic way, even though sure, that's part of it. I think it's making sure that my feed is made up of people who are at, all kinds of marketing teams, from small teams, from small in-house teams to larger agencies, to consultants, to people who are, basically marketing analyst or marketing coordinator all the way up to VP, and like just kind of understanding or seeing how people are talking about their problems, which problems they're facing, the language they use to describe it, right? And that's kind of the big thing, like making sure that I have that diversity and different kinds of perspectives. That's sort of the main thing. I think aside from that, I think it's also just keeping a good pulse on the things they pay attention to, right? So like there are sources of influence. Like, okay, like if my feed is full of like marketing coordinators, content marketing managers, directors of marketing, then I'm curious, like, well, what podcasts are they probably listening to? Or at least influenced by, right? Like, maybe we don't all listen to every single episode of even podcasts that we are fans of, right? But like maybe you'll hear of a podcast that you like and you'll go like, oh, and like this person, like I'm gonna check out a couple episodes. That could be a source of influence for you, right? So I pay attention to that stuff. And then like maybe the newsletters that they follow, websites they frequent, stuff like that.
Nice. Okay, so just to level set on the definition for folks too, anyone's listening to this, like how would you define audience research, right? Like as opposed to keyword research or website analytics.
Oh yeah, I love this. Okay, so keyword research will tell you what your audience is searching for. Audience research will tell you who your audience is or why they're searching for these things. Right? Like you can look up in like Ahrefs and see like, oh, cool. Email marketing has huge search volume. But like what does that mean? Like what is the intent behind that? Like is that people who are searching for that? Is it people who don't know what email marketing is and they're like, I just heard of this thing. What is it? And maybe if you sell some kind of like automation solution in email, maybe that's not your target audience, right? Like maybe you don't want somebody who's never heard of email marketing and is therefore like just starting to Google it. Like, maybe you want somebody who was pretty far down this rabbit hole and who cares deeply about, complex automations for whatever system they have in place. So that's sort of my long-winded answer to that.
No, I think that's a good like distinction because
Yeah.
I think at its space, like content marketers have been using Ahrefs for a while, right? Or SEMrush, or I still don't know if it's SEMrush, to be honest. Well, it's one of those. They've been using that for a while, right?
Yeah.
But like this idea of like audience research, I think is kind of new. I think what we had before were surveys and things like that, and we can get into that, the differences, like what different factors go into audience research. But follow-up question to the what are just like some prime examples, prime use cases for audience research, just to contextualize this for folks.
Oh yeah, this is great. Good examples of audience research or like practical applications for it. I really think it is, I think maybe one use case that'll be helpful for people because this is helpful to, I think, whether you're a solo like entrepreneur or creator to maybe a larger marketing team, is using audience research to understand how to build your content strategy. Right. So I think, and we think about an overall content strategy, absolutely keyword research can and in many cases should be part of that strategy, right? Like understanding like, well, what are the things people are searching for? Sure, totally reasonable. That's part of the strategy. When you think about an overall content marketing strategy or a content strategy, then you should be thinking about things like, the shared language in your audience. Like how do people describe things? You should be thinking about, maybe this is a bit further down, but thinking about like ways in which you might get your content distributed. And if you're thinking about distribution of content, then you're also going to be thinking about like, okay, which communities do they frequent? Which social accounts do they follow? What publications do they read that I might be able to pitch myself as guest contributor for, and thus get the word out on my content or what it is that I do. So I think doing audience research it gives you a more comprehensive look at all of these things within content marketing that help inform what you do from content creation to ideation to development and distribution.
Okay, so this kind of reminds me of a podcast that I heard Rand on. Those who don't know, CEO of SparkToro, talking about top funnel and how like SparkToro, other research intelligence or audience research tools, like that's where they shine and that's where they like play, is really like that top funnel. Do you feel like audience research helps with mid funnel and bottom funnel as well? And if so, just again, like giving some examples of like how audience research plays into the entire funnel, or rather ecosystem. I think we're like kind of moving away from funnel as of marketers.
Yeah, I appreciate this. I like the idea of thinking about it as audience research fitting into various touch points in a buyer's or audience member's journey, right? So other ways that this would fit in, I think, is sure, there's the top of funnel like content creation. I think there's also a way to approach it where you can use audience research where, you find where your audience frequents, right? The things that they're influenced by, and then consider how you can do some sponsorships there, right? And more targeted sponsorships where, like, instead of throwing money at Facebook ads to hopefully drive some top of funnel conversion, what you can do is hopefully find some influential newsletters or like Substacks where people might only have like 5 to 10,000 subscribers, but they're known well within their niche or among their given audience. And if you can sponsor some of these kind of smaller channels, so to speak, one, it costs a lot less money, right? It costs a lot less money than like paying for an ad placement for Morning Brew, right? That's super expensive. But you can find these like sort of smaller arbitrage opportunities. And two, also like it's nice to be able to support kind of an up and coming creator, right? It's kind of nice for your dollars to go to that. But if you time it right, you can boost impressions of your brand, and hopefully, depending on what kind of service or product that you provide, you'll hopefully be able to kind of tie it to some kind of revenue, if that makes sense for what it is you're doing, right? To be different if you were like a service-based business and hoping to tie the ad placement to new clients' book. Like that'd be kind of hard to do. But maybe if it's like it's a smaller cost or lesser cost product, that could be a good fit for that. That's one piece. And then I would also think about audience research for how you continue to engage your customers or maybe existing audience. And I think webinars or events are a really good way to do this because, at least in a case of a webinar, right? It's as close to a live event as you can have with your audience. So we'll say a webinar / events. And when you're being really strategic about this, like understanding what your audience wants from you and how you deliver it, you can drive and you can create more effective events that build affinity with your brand, hopefully to increase retention, and then also increase, word of mouth or referrals, or people are starting to say like, oh man, I love these webinars that you guys put on. Like it makes me want to recommend your product, right?
Yeah, no, I like both of those examples because they talk to the creation and the distribution part. So to break it down for folks, like I think that last one is help you create better content by having the right guests on your events, right? It's like basic form. And then the other one is is leveraging someone else that's influential, leveraging their distribution, right? So if they have already built up an audience like through their newsletter, then you're leveraging like this niche kind of distribution. And then applying this to real life and like B2C, like let's use the example. We had a friend over, which this speaks to, I don't know, the age that we're living in, is this person my husband met through gaming online, right? So like had never met in person. And then at some point, like him and some other friends had them over and he was talking about different things that he'd bought. Like we're like, oh, where'd you get this? Where'd you get that? And he's like, oh, I buy everything on podcasts, which is like crazy, right? Like, but I've seen that pattern like throughout the years, like it's just building, and almost everything, like legitimately a lot of the gadgets and like shirts and apparel that he'd purchased like from a podcast ad, right? So so anyone that's wondering like, is that really a good way to spend my marketing dollars, is like sponsoring someone else's podcast? Maybe, because like the second part of this too is if you are a startup, which is I think a lot of marketers listening to this, you want to kind of feel like you're everywhere, but you have a very limited budget, I think, especially now. So if you are buying up, like these niche audiences, like of your influencers, you can kind of feel like you're everywhere, even though you're only in this like tiny, like little niche of influence. But like that's your section of the market. And so
totally. And if you time it, if you time it right and hit the right, sort of channels or people or brands, you might only need like 4 or 5 placements or things to be timed right. And it looks like you're everywhere, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so the one other thing I'll add to the funnel idea is I do think that audience research is going to be like the most helpful for that top of funnel and just figuring out who your audience is, like who are the players basically in that space, and how you can start forming partnerships and relationships within those like niche communities. But when I was listening to that podcast, I was also thinking out actually can be like really effective for mid funnel in a way too, of if you find your super users or, like let's use content marketers as an example, like super influential content marketers that may really enjoy like your product, and you're able to form that relationship, introduce them to the product, and they do actually really like that product. Like, then you can get into the now like they can be demonstrating that product online. They can be like mentioning you in lists and things like that. Like they could be taking screenshots of your product. Like it could get pretty bottom funnel where it's like, here's how I use this product in my everyday life. So the equivalent of, here are when you think of mid funnel or bottom funnel, it's like the listicles of tools, right? It's like, here are the best marketing tools of 2022. Like that was the old way of doing things, I think, is like, that's the SEO model. To bring that into like modern day, I think about like your threads, like other, marketing threads that are like, here are the, top 7 tools like that I use every day and why. Here's like what I use them for, right? And so just bringing it into a more like modern sphere, like podcasting or social media. That's kind of like how I see like the new bottom mid funnel pieces. So I'm curious, like your take on this.
Yeah, no, I love that. I really love that. I also think you said earlier, it sort of like sparked another idea or thought in my head, which was what's that you said, but it was beginning of what you said. It got me thinking about, you know, I think now when we kind of think about kind of SEO content marketing versus essentially modern content marketing, I think what we're going to see is the savviest content marketers are going to be doing audience research. You know, whether or not this is a formally codified thing, the way SEO is, right? Which I don't think it will be. Whether or not they use SparkToro, they can use something else, right? You can do audience research in any way you want to. But I think the savviest content marketers who do this are going to be able to make their whole marketing team or their marketing operations a lot more sustainable. Because I think in doing the audience research, even if your purpose is content marketing, like you're a content marketing manager who is creating content, I think naturally you'll uncover the opportunities that aren't really just content, right? You'll uncover like the digital PR opportunities or the, you know, other like co-marketing or the kind of guest placement opportunities or the sort of demand generation piece, right? The sponsorships. Like, I think those are the things that the smartest content marketers will start to uncover, and it'll help the whole team just operate in a more sustainable and even just healthier way, right? Like, it's just like, I mean, however you feel about Google ads or Facebook ads, I don't think any marketer out there wants that to be their entire strategy, right? Even if you're a proponent of like, no, I need to run Facebook ads for these reasons. And look, I'm not against it. Like I think there are a lot of ways in which it makes a lot of sense to run Facebook ads. Like I think if you have a D2C product, it is kind of a no-brainer. Like I get it. But any D2C company, I'm sure would say like, yeah, but we don't love spending all this money there. Like it would be great to spend less and just kind of get more bang for our buck. So that's sort of like my rant for the day, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's good. You can have more rants. I'm open to more rants. But what that made me think of too is like, if you know your audience the best, like you win, right? Like just to simplify it, right? Like the person or company that like understands their ICP, understands like their audience the best is going to win, because they're going to know like the next moves. They're going to know how to go to market. They're going to know how to build their product better. Like it just like you mentioned, it feeds like the rest of the organization too. And probably helps you in your career because like, oh, I'm going to talk to this person, this like, content marketing manager. Not usually like who the director of product like would think to turn to normally. But I think if you can like become that person that just knows like what your audience wants from like a product perspective and a content perspective, that you put yourself in a good position.
Totally. Wait, now I'm curious, Camille. What has been sort of your entryway into audience research?
So I've used like SparkToro actually like in the past. So we can this really isn't like a plug like for this, but I'm just gonna list off like some things that come to mind. So Mark Young, like a previous manager of mine, like he used SparkToro like when he was like first marketer at Dually, right? And so figuring out kind of like the lay of the land, like just understanding like the sales worlds, him like not being a salesperson. I was kind of just to figure out who are the influencers in that space and like form some like initial partnerships, which kind of like set us up again, like basically like feel bigger than we were like early on, like this like seed stage. And so I think that's like a good application of that, of like I mentioned before, feeling bigger than you are, feeling like you're everywhere because you've like created the right, partnerships and things to begin with. And there's some other good examples too of using things like Hotjar or SurveyMonkey, like any of the survey tools really, that you can now like embed on your website or put in a chatbot. We've done some of that as well, right? Like where it's like asking your audience, like, who are you, basically? Like you identify yourself on the website, so you can kind of understand that. You can pair that with things that do come from like Google Analytics, right? So you can go in there, look at your audience insights, things like that. So it's that, but honestly, like where I get a lot of the day-to-day like audience insights is from social, right? It's like it's from social or like any form of community, right? So being in the right, first off, identifying the right communities to be in, I guess, is part of it. And identifying the right people to follow, right? Like who is everyone already listening to and who do they deem credible? Making that part of your feed in social, and then being in those communities, then all those things just become like part of your daily routine, right? And so it's like I know what Chris Walker is saying, I know what Dave Gerhardt's saying, right? Like I know what like all these salespeople are saying, because now our audience is like a mix of marketing and sales over at Pure Signal. So just kind of like making that part of your curated feed, I guess, like curating your feed right, and then reading all their comments and replying to comments, like same thing with DMs, and then just looking for patterns. So like that's a lot of it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I think like, even to your point, like I appreciate the sort of SparkToro shout out, but I also think like you don't even have to use SparkToro to do any of this stuff, right? A lot of it is, it's like audience research is some combination of, keeping up in the industry, looking at industry trends, social monitoring, all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so off that, like any other examples of maybe it's other tools that people can pair with, or even like competing tools for SparkToro, like how should somebody go about audience research in that sort of like content strategy mindset?
Yeah. So when I think about this stuff, I tend to think about it as doing the research from the macro down to the micro level. So at the macro level, you have like these sort of overall maybe category or industry trends. And there is a lot of like really good free resources, like Google Trends is still really good for this. I really like exploding topics. I even just like the digest they send, because it makes me very curious about all of these topics that are really taking off. I think that's super interesting to read. Like, for instance, there's a lot of skincare products that have become exploding topics in the recent, like, 2 to 5 years. And exploding topics will show, like, how the explosion has occurred. I think as far back as 10 years, I believe. And I think they use Google Trends to kind of power a lot of their data. So that's pretty cool to look at. But then on the micro level, you have like what your audience reads, what they listen to, those like what your audience is consuming, basically. That's where you have like the podcasts, magazines, newsletters, and so forth. But I think a big challenge for anybody is, how do you go from the macro to the micro? Like, how do you go from exploding topics, Google Trends, to the magazine that your target audience reads? Like, how do you know? And then that's where tools like SparkToro come into play. So SparkToro can help you find your audience's sources of influence, but also you can look at lots of other things, right? There's a website called frontpagemetrics.com that shows you the fastest growing subreddit in a given niche. So then you can see like, okay, of some of the popular niches or subreddits, like which ones are growing fastest, which ones are getting most traction. That's an interesting place to do that community research. There's also, I really like this resource called a newstip.com. And so I think it's sort of positioned as a PR resource, but I think it's really helpful for content marketers too. But you can search for topics, by you can search for news coverage or whatever by a given topic, or you can look up reporters based on the beat that they cover or the industry that they cover. So also helpful to see like the sort of mid-level trends, right? I like BuzzSumo for this too. I think BuzzSumo does a good job of showing you some of the popular things that are that are growing in a given niche. But those are just some examples.
Nice. Yeah. That gave me another idea. Going back to the beginning of this episode, we talked about how you can potentially translate this into having the right people at your event, right? To the content creation part, then also how to leverage an influencer's distribution network. But I think but there's another piece that's like role models, right? Like, how do you just like find out what your audience likes, like examples of the type of content that your audience likes, so that you can define like what good looks like, right? Like going back to the assumptions piece of this, like I'll have my own idea of what I think good content is, right? And then my gut is just to apply that to everyone else and just assume like if I like it, everyone's gonna like it. But I think like this could be like not a barrier. This could be like a in between step for you to kind of just like check your work and like make sure that like your definition of good content isn't getting in the way of you actually creating what your audience defines as good content. So I like the idea of looking through like, all those influencers, all the places that people consume, what they're consuming, and kind of like mapping it out or creating a mood board of like, here's what good content is going to look like at our organization.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Is that, do you guys do anything like that at SparkToro? Like, how do you define, like, again, like what good content looks like besides sort of like the internal gut check?
This is not very helpful, but it is mostly an internal gut check.
Yeah, no, fair.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, like I think we have the unfair advantage of our content being led by Rand Fishkin, right? Like there's that. Let's be honest, that's part of it. But ultimately, what Rand and I create or write, it's the things that we care about most, right? The things that we have a particular point of view on, and I say we like each of us, not even just our shared point of view, even though sometimes that's part of it, but like for each of us as individuals, like what are the things that that I feel really strongly about, that I think that I am especially good at or have a lot of experience in. And I think we're both pretty good at keying into those specific traits and having that inform what we write. So like maybe a good example of this actually is this kind of older blog post I have. I think it's from last year on cold outreach. And I'm saying it's a good example because it's something that can be very broad, right? I'm sure a lot of people Google like how to do cold outreach, and I'm sure there's a lot of best practices on it, right? But I also think that there's this emotional aspect to cold outreach that where people have like a visceral reaction to, oh, I freaking hate this. Like, do not reach out to me cold. And then there are other people on the other side of it who take the very much the other side of like, excuse me, I'm just trying to feed my family, And there's a wide range of emotions in this topic, which makes it a pretty good topic to write about because there are a lot of points of view on it. And as long as you kind of back up what you have to say, you can't really be wrong. Like, not really. If you're backing up what you have to say based on evidence and based on firsthand experience, based on some kind of metrics, people can say, like, I don't agree with this, or this wasn't my experience. But when it comes down to it, they can't really say you're wrong. Right. So that's kind of what makes it a good like content brand post, because it's the point of view that you and your brand have. It positions maybe the best aspects of your product. Then it's an opportunity to write about things that you believe in. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I don't want to be dismissive of like gut either, because Chris Walker like talks about this, and I thought it was like on point of your gut, or at least how he sees gut, is really just like a collection of insights, right? Like it's a bunch of like qualitative data that and some quantitative data that you've like taken in, to then like have this gut reaction of like, I know this is going to work, and you can't explain it, but you're like, I've done this enough times. So I think using you and Rand as an example of people who post like near daily and have a decent following, so have like a lot of data, basically a lot of just like qualitative and quantitative data through both of your networks, that your gut like really is data driven. And so I think like that's where you have the advantage too of, at this point, having done it enough times, just being able to like rely on gut. So
That's
did want to
true.
like clarify.
That's a good point. I do appreciate that, because when I also say we're going on gut, it's not like based on random vibes, right? It's like
Right.
going on gut, yeah, from, Rand's 20 years of experience in tech, digital marketing, and SEO, my like 10 years of experience in journalism and content marketing, like, our our gut instincts do come from a place of, being well informed in some regard, and then understanding even just quickly like the gaps in knowledge, and knowing like, okay, there's a thing here I don't know, I got to research this part and make this better.
Yeah, interesting. Do you find that you guys ever take like different beats on things? Like you mentioned, like your sweet spot being like that journalism background, like content marketing. He's, I think, like very much still a content marketer too, but maybe more broadly, like has some of that SEO background too, and other marketing spots. So do you guys ever, I don't know, like talk about who's gonna do what, or is it really just you taking in qualitative information, him taking in qualitative information, and then sort of operating in silos, but like with trust?
That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. It is a little bit of us operating in silos, but with trust. Then I mean, like I say in silos, in that like we don't have like a weekly or monthly or ever meeting where we're like, what are we going to talk about with the content, right? We just kind of go by like, what I've been seeing lately. A lot of people are talking about this thing. I disagree, or like, here's my point of view. I'm going to go write that thing. And I think we sort of naturally have been able to have like these parallel paths where I think he, as the CEO and co-founder of SparkToro, and of course he is thinking, several steps ahead of his chess moves, right? He's thinking several steps ahead of like, okay, what is the tech landscape probably going to look like next year or 2 years from then? What are the things I'm seeing? Granted, I can be doing that too, but I think as the, leader of this company, like he's already thinking about that stuff. So his brain naturally goes to here are some long-term strategic vision type stuff. Whereas for myself, I spend most of my time with SparkToro like on marketing, right? Like Rand as CEO was doing marketing and like product, customer support, right? We're all doing some customer support. But my world really is more marketing. So I'm more like, my point of view tends to come more from the perspective of like being on the front lines, talking to other marketers, being the marketing practitioner who's the one who is making shit happen in Canva, right? like the things that frontline marketing people do, right? So that tends to color my perspective of things. And so with that, with our day-to-days kind of being different, I think we naturally have different points of view where we can kind of have, I don't want to say stay in our own lane, but that's a little bit of what I'm saying. Where I don't want to say that is, I just don't want to make it sound like I'm not allowed to talk about this and Rand's not allowed to talk about that, because there isn't anything like that. It's just that we've kind of naturally formed our own sort of division of labor, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Is you're playing to your strengths, and there's just kind of like a natural like distinction between your voices too, right? So that's really it's really insightful. Thank you. All right, so cadence. So how often should you be conducting audience research?
Ooh, as often as you need to. So I do think that audience research is, depending on what your needs are, right? It's not as dynamic as social listening, which is something that probably changes day to day or maybe like weekly. I do feel like audience research is something that it's like a monthly-ish thing to me, right? We're like, if you're looking for the influential podcasts or YouTube channels in a given niche, that's probably not going to change day to day, right? I think that's fair to say. It's probably going to change more than once a year, right? So I think it's something you want to keep a pulse on monthly or quarterly, maybe. And I will say, kind of shameless plug here, we are launching a new feature in SparkToro called audience tracking. And we've been beta testing this for a little while. And I think it's about to launch. And maybe when this podcast episode comes out, it will have launched. But you can track your audiences, right? So if you're tracking audience of like people who self-identify as marketing directors, you can track this audience in SparkToro and you can see how the trends change over time. So you can see like, of this audience over this, time period that you've defined, 8% more are engaging with this particular social account, or 10% less are engaging with this particular website. So it'll help you find some of those emerging trends, or maybe even just like up and coming voices to look out for. So that's something I'm really excited about because I think that'll also be really informative for people as they figure out like, okay, once I did my SparkToro search, like then what? Right? I think it becomes clear as to like why somebody should come back in a couple weeks or, in a month or two. And it gives them a better understanding of how their audience may or may not evolve over time.
Nice. Okay, perfect. All right, so like measurement. I know this is kind of a bit a hot topic, like lately in marketing of attribution, measuring stuff. I have a little bit of understanding, I think, like on your point of view on this, but let's say like you're under the scrutiny of your CEO, your VP, whoever it is, and you want to measure the effectiveness or the accuracy of your audience research. How would you kind of go about measuring something like this?
Interesting. To measure the accuracy of audience research. I don't know that there's a definitive way to really, I don't think there's any way to unequivocally say like X is X because of these reasons. I think what you can do is test it in a myriad of ways. Like, I think if you have done your audience research and have found a bunch of social accounts that you think are influential in your niche, a way to test that is to engage with these social accounts, right? Like as a human being, right? Maybe you could be a brand, but like talk like a human, right? But like, follow along with their discussions, amplify their content if it's relevant to you or relevant to your brand, comment on it, be additive to the conversation. And I think if you kind of look back on this, maybe after like a month or two, and just kind of see like, did this yield anything? And by yield anything, it might even be like, did this lead to an interesting marketing opportunity? Did a new customer find us because of these interactions? Did this start a relationship with this particular person or creator that can lead to a co-marketing partnership in the next couple months or so? Like, I think those are ways to gauge it where you can see if you're on the right track. And then hopefully you reach that next step of maybe doing some co-marketing or maybe sponsoring their podcast or their newsletter. And then understanding if, is this driving any kind of meaningful, like, are these driving impressions for us? Like, are people hearing about us more? Have we been seeing, maybe use social listening to see, like, have people been talking about us more? And I think these are all important, KPIs for understanding whether you're on the right track. And I do think it's something that like it might take a couple months to realize any kind of ROI on this sort of thing. But I think that's the case with pretty much any type of marketing effort that isn't direct response, advertising, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So like measuring on the effectiveness of the campaigns, right? And then like the other thing that I kind of like think about is because I've been in orgs where I've seen like partnerships and influencer marketing not go according to plan. Like not getting as much as you want out of it, which I'm sure like any marketer can probably relate with. And so I think there's like two things to consider in that did I do something wrong or like, is this not the right person? Right. So like, and being able to like double check that. One thing that I sometimes look at is what type of, like, for instance, within marketing, you're going to have different levels of marketing, VP to individual contributor. Right. So it's what people are interacting like with somebody's post, right? Both in, like the likes, the comments, the quality of the comments, like there's kind of like this sort of qualitative analysis you can do on like the quality, I guess, of someone's network or like their reach. And so there's some like fact checking things, I guess, that you can do that way. And that's sometimes like
Yeah,
how we'll measure it. Yeah.
totally. I think, I think the other piece is, especially in the case of creator marketing or influencer marketing, I think it's really important that the marketers who are managing the dollars here, I think it's really important that they actually know what the value is in a given creator marketing relationship or sponsorship. And I say that because what I see a lot, right, is, well, so and so has 50,000 followers. Let's just sponsor their newsletter and we'll get more customers or we'll get more subscribers, right? Which I think, you know, taking it with a grain of salt, that's a fair assumption, right? But what I think people need to think about is, or really look into is, why does this person have 50,000 followers? Like, what is the affinity that they have with their audience? What is the trust that they've built? Is the trust based on, hey, I'm a super rich person and I made a bunch of money and I'm teaching you how to do it. Here's how you do it. And they actually do it, right? Like, is it that? Or is it, hey, I'm a really experienced thought leader in this space and I'm really smart and I have cool ideas and people like me? Like, those are two different kinds of influence. And if you were looking for a direct response effect, like, I want to get 50 interactions out of this, I want to get more subscribers, I want to get more customers, that thought leader probably isn't going to be the right fit. But that, you know, make money, I make a lot of money. Here's proof I make a lot of money. I'm going to show you how to make a lot of money. Like, right, that very clean, clear niche. Whether or not you agree with it is besides the point. But that person's probably going to be the one who will help you realize that immediate ROI. And, like I said, I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just that there is one that will probably yield more results in the immediate term than the other one. And if you as a marketer are if your priority is, I just want to do direct response ads, I just want to get my subscribers, fine. But if you're looking at this as a long-term play where you're like, I want to build affinity with my audience, I also want to grow my audience, I want people to trust me, I want people to like me, I want to get more eyeballs on my website ultimately, you're probably going to need to do some combination of those things, or those types of sponsorships, I mean.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think we did an influencer piece like back at Marketer Hire. And the thing that I remember from it was there was a chart that showed like what you'd get back from like an influencer, like the ROI basically on different levels of influencers. And the micro influencers were almost always like the better ROI and like the better like reach, like for your audience. And so the current theory, like I think, is the up and coming creators are typically like the better spend like for you, especially I think like the 10K followers, subscribers, like kind of range, because you just get more bang for your buck. And and if they do continue to grow, then you just get a really good partnership because they'll value the fact that you invested in them early. So it's like anything,
Yeah,
like if you invest in the right people, companies like early, you get the most returns, right? And so
totally. That makes total sense.
sweet. Okay, well, I'll wrap this up with what advice would you give to marketers that are looking to incorporate audience research into their content programs?
Yeah. My advice for people incorporating audience research, I'm going to say, find small ways to test your hypotheses along the way. Like, find low risk ways to test whether or not you're on the right track so that you can build up your case over time to take big swings and have more confidence in them, right? Because audience research ultimately helps you be more effective in long-term marketing. And if you find the small ways to test it, and by small ways, I mean like maybe taking an audience research informed approach to writing a new blog post or social media post, or having some of the insights inform the topic of a webinar. These are all ways to test ideas, right? And if you're seeing over time, like, oh my gosh, like taking this kind of approach to power some of our editorial efforts, this is this is elevating our profile. Like more people are noticing us, more people are talking about us. That'll help you over time figure out where you should take more risk or where you should swing big. Like maybe then the big thing at the end of the year, right, becomes, should we do this huge conference? Like based on all the data points that we have so far, we're going in this direction of, we think we can host an awesome new conference and drive like 1,000 registrants. We think we can do this. Or maybe it's, we've developed all these amazing relationships, all these up and coming creators. Let's spend a bunch of money and do these really cool creative sponsorships with them. Right. And I think that's one meaningful and powerful way to think about audience research. Right. You think about the small wins you can score, the small ways you can fail, right? Where like, if you take an audience research informed approach to a blog post and it flops, whatever, right? Like you can get over it, do a new one. But if you're able to do this along the way and have this culminate into bigger projects or bigger campaigns that you can have more conviction on, I think you'll win. I think you'll have a really good time.
Nice. I love that take. I feel like I can't add anything else to that. So where can people find you?
Yeah, so people can find me on my personal site, amandanat.com. I have a newsletter there. I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn at Amanda Nat. And then for SparkToro, check us out at SparkToro.com. We have free accounts, we have free tools. Hopefully you'll become a paid user if it's useful to you.
Perfect. Well, really valued this conversation. Had a lot of fun. So we'll chat soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Camille.
Thanks for listening to Content Logistics. This episode was produced by Motion, a done-for-you B2B podcasting agency for busy marketers. If you liked what you heard, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.